And, Joshua and the kids came as much as they could. And even if we had 6 days off, Trucker and I were on a flight home, we were like, okay, well, and that's a whole thing in itself, right? Because it's a day travel each way and the jet lag and all the things. We would fly back to New York, have 2 hours of sleep, and we were back at the hospital the next, but we didn't care. It was just this is what we need to do so that we can be with our family as much as possible. And
welcome to Our Family Invests, the podcast where successful couples come together to share their inspiring stories of balancing family, life, and business. We're Mike and Caroline Neubauer, husband and wife entrepreneurs striving to live our best lives with our family at the center. This podcast celebrates the couples who inspire us, invest in each other, and raise those around them to the next level. Join us as we explore their challenges and victories. Let's learn, share, and grow together. Today, we are honored to introduce Joshua and Shauna Dukes, a couple who embody strength and unwavering faith. They are the proud parents of 3 teenagers and a forever 3-year-old son whom they lost to cancer in 2017. Despite enduring unimaginable loss, including the deaths of brothers to addiction, parents to disease, and coworkers to suicide, they've chosen to live with optimism and purpose. Joshua, a former Maui firefighter, stood firm in his beliefs even when it meant walking away from his dream job. Shauna has turned her pain into a mission, coaching others through her Holistic Grief Academy. She's also an author and podcast host, sharing her journey to help others heal. Together, they've transformed tragedy into triumph, inspiring others to live boldly, stand strong, and find hope, no matter the circumstances. This is a conversation you don't want to miss.
all right, you guys. So I know that's a pretty heavy intro, and there's a ton to unpack there, but let's back it up a minute and tell us how you met and what attracted you to each other. This is kind of a funny story, actually.
So when we were in our early 20s, we both worked in Paia. And Paia, Maui, it's a little town on the north shore of Maui, for those of you who aren't in Hawaii. But I was a bartender, and my wife worked at a restaurant, and we kind of knew each other. There's always, what do they call that? Tuesday night is industry night. You go out to the different pubs or bars or whatever and hang out with other. Tuesday is typically slow, so that's the night that all the people who work in the industry. So we kind of knew each other. I would go into her restaurant and get breakfast in the morning after working a bar shift.
Okay, pause. I'm going to finish the story. So I'm working at Cafe de Simi, and a girl that I worked with had a crush on him. So he would come in after bartending, working at the bar all hungover, and she would always hook up his crepe and stuff. And she was like, that's so hot. Look at his arms. And I was like, whatever. I was dating a guy at the time, so I didn't think too much about it. And then a couple weeks later, my boyfriend went back to Canada, the guy that I was dating, and I was surfing at Honolulu Bay, and he paddled up without his shirt on. And I remember looking at him, and I was like, oh shit, he's got a lot more than just nice arms. I got in trouble. And we started hanging out, and really, that's the rest is kind of history. We started being friends, and shortly after I broke up with my boyfriend, we started dating. And I love the saying, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans, because we were both kind of rebounding at the time, and we never really thought, we were just having a good time. All we did was party and surf, really. And then we got pregnant really quick, and God really used that to soften our hearts towards marriage, towards the idea of being parents. And we're 20 years. We'll be married 20 years this August, right? This year, 2025.
Wow. Yeah.
And I would say that we're probably more in love than we ever have been now. And we've been through a lot together. So, yeah.
Yeah. So you guys have been through more than probably anybody I know. And I wouldn't wish that on anyone, but, seeing how you guys have been able to rise out of the ashes has been so inspiring. And I know, Joshua, you and I met in the fire department, right? We were part of the 28th Maui Fire recruit class. And I remember that process was, there were 2,700 applicants for that test, right? And then they whittled it down to 60 that got asked to be in the physical agility test. And in that physical agility test, I remember walking in, and there were just these barbarians of men, and you were among them. I was not, right? But the one thing that really stood out, and I remember you from day one, was like, even though you just like were like an Adonis, you were a beast, you were just so gentle and humble and uplifting of everyone that you came around. And you were just so perfectly positioned for this job. You were a natural selection. And even through recruit class, you were Mr. Firefighter, right? And it seemed like you were just born for this job. And you even named your youngest boy Trucker, which is just so fitting, right? And then we got online, and you and I ended up at the same station. And I remember Trucker coming into the station and hanging out with the guys, riding on the fire truck, and just cruising around the station. And then the cancer diagnosis. Take us through that.
As you said, I'd been on the fire department for, I don't know, quite a few years when that happened. I had just flown back to Seattle for I would say my uncle, but we called him my cousin just because he was younger than me. So it's kind of weird to have an uncle that was that. But
My uncle brother.
yeah, uncle cousin. I'm not from Kentucky. But yeah, so it was kind of dealing with that. He ended up passing away from suicide, and it was a pretty heavy weekend. And I went kind of solo-ish, flew back, and I was at the airport and waiting for Shauna to pick me up, and she wasn't there. And so I called her and I said, "Babe, where are you? I'm at the airport. Is anybody picking me up?" And she's like, "Hey, we're at the doctor's office right now, and they want to take Trucker up to the hospital for some tests. They found a lump in his abdomen." And I was like, whoa, hold on. I need to be there for this process. Can one of you, her mom was there. I was like, can one of you come pick me up and then we'll go to the hospital? And that was a week before Thanksgiving in
2014.
And I can't remember who picked me up, but somebody picked me up. We get to the doctor's office and we go up to the hospital. And you hear the words that no parent wants to hear. A doctor comes in and says, "I think your son has cancer, but we have to." Right now, his iron was down really low in his blood.
No, there was some count in his blood that he needed more tests on Oahu, but we couldn't fly until he had a blood transfusion. And actually, at this point, they hadn't even said cancer. They just said he needs to go to more specialists. But in retrospect, it was like, man, all the nurses knew like it was something, because it was just very solemn. Like they were like, you have a long road ahead of you, kind of like that's how we were treated. And then I remember, we get to Oahu. So we had his blood transfusion. We're over on Oahu, and they're like, and the pediatric oncologist is going to come in. And you guys, I didn't even know what I didn't know what an oncologist was. Like, that's how ignorant I was to that whole world. I was like, what's an oncologist? He's like, it's a cancer doctor. I'm like, wait, what? Like, I'm still waiting for them to say he has some sort of a stomach bug and send us home, right? Not really realizing how grave our situation was. Yeah. And from the time we went to the doctor, he had been sick off and on for a while, but he was also cutting molars. So he would, he would have these fevers. We would give him Tylenol. He would recover. And then he started getting really lethargic. So he would like follow me around and lay on the floor and look at me. And my mom was like, his skin doesn't look, the color of his skin is not looking right. And so she's the one that kind of started poking in his belly. And she was like, honey, come feel this. And I thought I was touching his rib, but his ribs were like 2 inches above. And I'm like, oh, that's not good. So we went to the doctor. They found the mass. And from that point where we went, had blood work, went to Maui Memorial. They flew us to Oahu. I think it was 5 months before Trucker came home. Well, 5 months.
I think even before I came home too. I mean, I hadn't even unpacked my suitcase. I still had the same clothes with me from flying over to Seattle for the weekend.
Wow.
Yeah.
We spent Thanksgiving in the hospital. My mom flew out, and my brother Phil came over.
How did you break the news to the kids, your other kids?
We've always had a really open family. And what I mean by that is we've always chosen honesty as just a part of our ethos, part of our family core values. And, even, sorry if you got younger kids out there, but, we always, the whole Santa Claus thing, we never went down that road just because, I didn't want my kids to hear me tell of this person who may or may not exist, depending on what your family believes. And then, when they get 10, 11, 12, be like, my parents have been lying to me this whole time. Santa's not real, So, we always had a really open dialogue with our kids about our failures, about, our past, our history, the times we triumphed and the times we fell down. And so it wasn't too challenging. We just kind of, it was challenging, but we just were honest with them and said, hey, you're.
Also, side note, we're not like ho humbugs. We still made it fun. Like every Christmas, we did Daddy Claus and Mommy Claus, and
Yeah.
we did Daddy Tooth Fairy and Mommy Tooth Fairy, and we would still
Right.
leave money underneath their pillow, but we would also write them an encouraging note, and they knew it was from us. It wasn't like a mythical creature coming in the middle of the night. So, like, side note, we still had fun with it. We just we were
Sure.
just very honest.
Yeah. That's awesome. I like that. We kind of try and implement something similar with Nico, where it's like, look, we're not going to lie to you. We're going to be an open book. We're not trying to hide anything, but we're going to let you make your own decisions on the whole Santa Claus thing. And when you're ready, that's fine, right? I can't imagine what must have been going through your heads. And like, when did you like, okay, I have to confront this. Okay, this is cancer. This is really happening. Because I would imagine that time would be like so crazy in your heads. Like, no, this is not really happening. We need a second opinion. We need a third opinion. We need just a pill and just wake up and forget all this stuff, right? Like, when did it become real?
Well, I think that initially they said, we think it could be one of two cancers. There was one called Wilms, which starts in the kidney area, and it's pretty survivable. And then the second one they said was called neuroblastoma, which has a very low survivability rate. And so we were kind of waiting for those results. They ended up taking a biopsy of his tumor. And after that, he almost crashed. He almost died in the hospital. And I don't know if it was just, the trauma of the surgery or just everything getting inflamed, the cancer getting pissed off because it got poked, or I don't, I'm not 100% sure on that. But I think at that moment, we ended up sharing a photo of Trucker hooked up with all his leads and his heart monitor, sleeping in the hospital with, his incision. And that picture went pretty viral. But it was right around that time period where I was like, he's fighting for his life, and we just knew that this was going to be a long, intense journey. Actually, at that point, I didn't even think it was going to be long, just because he almost didn't make it through the night after the biopsy.
Right. And that time, I feel fortunate to have been alongside of you and watched you through that experience. And at that time, I saw the fire department come together, not just the Maui Fire Department, but fire departments all over the country were reaching out, and the amount of attention and the amount of love that was shown to your family and to Trucker was just incredible. I never saw anything like it. And I still, to this day, have never seen people rally around someone so much as it did with Trucker. How did that must have really lifted you up, but at the same time, you're still going through this, like, I'm losing my son, right?
Mm-hmm.
How was that juxtaposition?
That's a good question. I think for my spirits, just it really lifted them up. I felt like I wasn't alone in that. As you're going through something like that, you start to think, especially on a firefighter salary, you start thinking about travel costs and all the medical costs associated with everything, and it's stressful. But then I don't know what the initial thing was. It might have been that photo, but for whatever reason, our story started going viral and picking up steam on social media. I wasn't really a social media guy back then. My grandmother was like, when are you going to get with the times and get a Facebook account so I can see what's going on, with the grandkids. That was kind of a little bit before that. I think I just started a Facebook page or something like that. But it went really crazy. And we, like you said, we started getting reached out from fire departments all around the country asking how they could help. The world. Maui Fire Department stepped up. Honolulu Fire Department stepped up. The chief showed up one day at the hospital and brought us a pillow from the Honolulu Fire Department. We had our Maui chiefs fly over. We had people like Jeff Robeson going around and getting my schedule covered so I didn't have to work. He initially ended up voluntolding. I tell people, he went around with a calendar and said, hey, these are the shifts that are open. Which ones are you working? And he had guys cover my shifts for up to 6 months.
Yeah, he did.
And that to me was like, one of the most beautiful things that I've ever experienced. To have a brother like that, just all the brothers at the Kihei station. Like you guys rallied around me and supported me in so many ways, and it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in one of the darkest and hardest times in my life.
Did you ever feel like just giving up on each other, family, life? And how did you get through that?
You know what? It's so weird, but no.
That's amazing.
You would think that would come up, but I think that for a really long time, which is really hard for most people to fathom, is like we were in survival mode for
Yeah.
years. It's not
Yeah.
like the flu a week. It's like years. We decided to um we did get second opinions, and I called around all around the country, and most places do the same protocol for the same type of cancer, which just really makes you feel like a number and like, this is your cancer, here's your flow chart. If this really toxic, horrible treatment doesn't work, then we do this really toxic, horrible treatment. If it does work, here's your path, here's your path. But really, you're just a number in a trial, and it's all just a big guess. And the pediatric cancer world and how awful it is, and cancer treatment in general could be a whole podcast, so I won't go down that rabbit hole. But the reason why we ended up transferring treatment to New York was because when I called there and I consulted with their doctors, I felt like out of everywhere that I talked to, they were a little bit more personalized and they were ahead of the game as far as the trials that they were doing. So that's why we needed to go there. Well, as you know, having him treated in New York and having our family live here was like a whole another set of added
Yeah.
trauma to process, right?
Yeah.
And we knew it was going to be like that. But yeah, I really think that if there has been struggles in our marriage, it's been post that. Because in it, we were just so survival, like in survival mode. We were just going, we were just doing what we needed to do. And we did the best that we could with that situation. But the reality is that Trucker and I pretty much lived in New York for a year and a half. And, Joshua and the kids came as much as they could. And even if we had 6 days off, Trucker and I were on a flight home. We were like, okay, well, and that's a whole thing in itself, right? Because it's a day travel each way and the jet lag and all the things. We would like fly back to New York, have 2 hours of sleep, and we were back at the hospital the next, but we didn't care. It was just like, this is what we need to do so that we can be with our family as much as possible. And we just did it. I will say that, post that, like post death, I think that's probably when our marriage has struggled the most. And even then, I feel like God just kind of has held us, which has been so beautiful, and I'm so grateful for that. But not without some hardship. And I think it's always easier to see things in retrospect. But I think that there was one point after my dad died during the pandemic. So during the pandemic, right, it was several years after Trucker had passed, but Joshua was dealing with just the animosity at the fire station and not going along with the narrative and getting pushback from that and not feeling the brotherhood love that we felt during that time. And so he was going through his own like set of trauma with that, and my dad was dying, and it was just there was a time when I came back from saying goodbye to my father, and I remember having a talk with Joshua, and I was like, hey, so, and how this came about was my brother and his wife, they'd been married for like 2 years, but I got to spend time with them, and it had been years since I'd seen them, but just in Canada with their dad.
Yeah.
They were like best friends. Like their relationship was so beautiful, and it inspired me. And I came home and I was like, I feel like we're not doing that anymore. I feel like we're kind of annoyed roommates, which any married couple can get to that point,
Absolutely.
right? And you have to check yourself, because that's the tipping point. If you're an annoyed roommate and you're not squashing the things that you're annoyed about and you're not having those hard conversations, then the roots of bitterness grow and we see marriages fall apart. There's a 90% statistic of couples that separate after they lose a child, which
Wow.
we understand. We understand that because it's just the grieving process itself looks so different for men and for women. And it's so hard. It's so painful and it's so hard. And it looks different for both of you. So if you're not really aware, you're not willing to have those conversations, I get it 100% why marriages fall apart.
Yeah. And I think I agree with her on that in the thick of it, as a firefighter, like, as you well know, when you have a job to do in front of you, you can compartmentalize and put stuff aside. And that was the mission at the time, was to save Trucker and keep my family solid through all these things. And so I had two big things to focus on. And thankfully, because of the fire department and because of the brotherhood, I was able to just have those two things. I wasn't worried about the other stuff that was going on. Even to my detriment, there were some things that I let slip, maybe some bills that I didn't pay on time and that kind of stuff, just because I was like traveling and stressed out. But even, going back to the brotherhood, there was a time when I think one of my kids was like, somebody's out underneath your truck, and we live out in the country, and, it's someone would intentionally have to make their way down our long gravel driveway, get to my house and get under my truck. And I'm like, someone's stealing my catalytic converter. Like, what's going on here? And I go out there and I see these feet underneath my truck. And I was like, excuse me, what's going on? And it was Cap Scotty Martin. And he pulled his head out and he's like, oh, I figured, it's probably been a while since you changed your oil on your truck. I was going to change the oil on your truck, and like guys were doing that kind of stuff. So I could focus on the mission of saving my child and keeping my family together, so we planted a flag and put a big emphasis on, family dinners and doing the simple things, praying together, reading books together. When we went to New York, we'd go to Central Park and go on walks together as a family. And we really just I really made that our mission, our goal. And even in New York, we would try and go on date nights. There was this really nice Italian restaurant, Campagnola's, right around the Ronald McDonald House. And we would leave the kids in the Ronald McDonald House and we'd go over and have a dinner there and just try and continue dating each other during that period of time. And I think the darkness really kind of kicked in after he passed away, because it's just a tidal wave of feelings and emotions and grief and stuff that you can't even imagine or anticipate.
Hey family, real quick, if you would prefer to watch your content, head on over to Our Family Invests on YouTube. You can watch this podcast and more over there. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that little bell icon too to make sure you never miss an episode. And now, back to the show.
Yeah, Shauna, you mentioned COVID and how, it got really dark during that time. And, being in the fire department at that time, there was so much information and misinformation, and nobody really knew what was going on, it felt like. And even though I feel like the fire department was trying to look out for everyone's best interest, there was cracks in the armor, right? There was tension within the walls. And, I think that it kind of came to a head when, Joshua, you stood up for what you believe were your rights at the time, and you got some pretty serious pushback, right? Can you walk us through that journey?
Yeah, definitely. As you said, during the pandemic, I think the fire department was doing the best that they could with the information, but so much of the information that even in the fire department we were getting was contradictory. We would have policies that would come out and then they would change them. And, we would have, certain stations moved to different quarters for quarantine stuff because they said that, we had to do that. But then when it came down to that place starting to charge money for it, the fire department's like, oh, well, we got to have you guys move back in. It's safe now. And we're like, well, is it about safety or is it about money? There's different things like that. And then we had things where, they would tell us that, masks needed to be worn and different things like that. But then we would all eat together and go sleep in the same bunk room together. And, we're bringing these things up and they don't have any way to address it. So there was some frustrations there and a lot of us were questioning it. The kind of pivotal point for me was, remember this day because I was cooking. Governor Ige at the time came out with his emergency proclamation. And I knew that without a government emergency proclamation, they would not be able to mandate any type of treatments. In order for certain treatments to be required, there has to be an emergency proclamation. And so we kind of saw the writing on the wall. And at this point, I'd already been talking to a lot of the guys in the department. There was 70 guys in Maui Fire Department that did not want to get vaccinated. Roughly around that, I think another 10 from ARF. And so we had already been communicating and talking about that. And, I knew our chief really, really well. and kind of came up in the department with him. He was, one of our instructors in our recruit class. And, he already always had an open door policy with me. So that day I went into his office and I said, "Hey, Chief, you always said you had an open door policy. I just saw this happen. I think they're going to try and, force us to get vaccinated to keep our jobs." And he said, "No, that's not going to happen. We're going to fight for you guys, and we got your back." And I was like, "Awesome, Chief. That's great." Because there's a bunch of us that aren't going to go do that, and it could really hinder the fire department. I'm not sure what the exact time frame was, but it was probably, I don't know, maybe within 3 weeks of that, we all got an email saying, if we don't get vaccinated, we're going to lose our jobs. And I, again, having an open door policy with our chief, I went in there and I said, "Chief, what's this all about? You said you were going to fight for us. Like you said that this wasn't going to be a requirement." And he got really annoyed, looked at me, shook his hands and said, "My hands are tied. There's nothing I can do. Get out of my office." And at that point, I'm thinking about me losing my job. I'm thinking about the other, 60 plus guys that are going to lose their job, the bunch of the recruits that were going to lose their job. And I decided to organize. And again, like I wasn't one of the junior guys. I'd been on the job for like 12 years at this point. And I said, we have to do something about this. We have to fight. So I felt like it was my duty as one of the more senior guys to stand up for everybody. And, again, I had already put myself out there with Chief. It's not like he didn't know my opinion or my thoughts on that already. I might as well just continue that conversation. At this time, testing wasn't even allowed. And the reason we got testing was because we filed a class action lawsuit. Our union wasn't fighting for us. Their stance was basically get vaccinated, but there's nothing we can do about it. And so, we ended up reaching out to a friend of ours who's a lawyer here in Maui. And then she was aware of a class action lawsuit that was taking place statewide with all the different agencies of first responders. So in the lawsuit, there was fire departments or fire department members from all counties, from police from all counties, medics from all counties, and even lifeguards. And the way, and just to preface this, I'm not anybody that has ever sued anybody before. That's not anything that I'm familiar with. I'm not like, "Oh, I stubbed my toe, I'm going to sue you," or whatever, But I felt like we had to fight for our careers that we invested in and put years and years. And, and like even all during 2020, we were going into people's houses without vaccine and treating people with COVID patients. And it was fine for us then. But then all of a sudden, now that this thing came out and, many of us already had COVID and beat it, we had to get this, experimental medication. So we ended up filing the class action lawsuit. And the way that a class action lawsuit works is you can have 1 million people under that class action lawsuit, but you have to have a class representative. The way that we decided to do it, there's going to be a class representative for each department. And so I was a class representative on the lawsuit for Maui Fire Department against the governor, lieutenant governor, the health department, the mayors of all counties, and then the chiefs of all the respective departments, along with 11 other guys. So there was one of our police chiefs. He was one of the plaintiffs. Tamayo Perry, the lifeguard who unfortunately died last year from a shark attack, he was the plaintiff for the North Shore Lifeguards Association. And we just started pushing back against these things, and we fought, and we were able to get the right to test. We filed an injunction to at least to be able to test to keep our jobs. But once that process started, it seemed to me like I had a target on my back. And in fact, I had a friend in the administration at that period of time who told me, he came up to me, took me aside, and he said, "Brother, I love you. We've been friends for a long time. I need you to know this. You got to keep your head down. They're looking for a reason to fire you. They're talking about you in the chief's office."
Wow. And so you got the ability to test, right? So that got passed. And then they ended up firing you for what was it for? It was for not wearing a mask during a drug test or something like that?
Yes.
Can you tell us that story?
Just side note, this is like 2020, 2023. This is after the pandemic. Like,
the doors
there's no more mask mandate. People are wearing masks.
Welcome again.
Yep.
Yeah.
People are wearing masks or not. It doesn't matter. No one's wearing a mask at the like hardly anyone's wearing a mask anymore. So this is post-pandemic. They already declared that the pandemic was over, and they get called for a drug test.
So I'm going to rewind just a little bit, just so there's context. But we had a driver's test, a promotional exam within the fire department. it's you're off duty, you're not paid, you go in and take the test. And when they had it, there was a mask mandate still going on. But again, the social distancing was a thing. The vaccine requirement stuff was a thing. And there's a lot of contradictory stuff that was going on in the fire department too. So around this time, you know how we do the yearbook every year in the fire department?
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you who don't know, Maui Fire Department does a photo every year of who's on what crew, what shift, what watch. And it's really cool. It's like a historical record. Like I've looked back at some of the other ones and you're like, oh yeah, I remember that, Captain. That was a great crew. Or I remember going to a fire with those guys. And, a lot of guys retire and move in and out of the profession. And it's just a really cool way to see people's progression in their careers and the history of Maui Fire Department. So they were really pushing the mask issue at this time. And we all got emails, threaten us for those of us who weren't wearing masks to wear them, even though we're eating in the same room together, we're sleeping in the same room together. And they want us to wear masks when we're outside, but it's okay if we don't wear them when we're at the station. Like all these weird rules that weren't making sense. But we got an email saying that we all needed to wear masks. But a week later, we got another email saying, hey, the yearbook picture's coming out, but for the picture where we're all going to be shoulder to shoulder, we don't want you guys to wear the mask. So we can see everybody's smiling faces. And I'm like, what is this? Is this an optics thing or is this a safety thing? So there's one picture of me wearing a mask during the whole COVID pandemic, and it was actually in the yearbook for that year because I kind of took that opportunity to say this is ridiculous. I'm the only person in the whole yearbook wearing a mask, and just because I wanted to make a point, like, what is it? Is it about safety? Is it about do these things actually work, or is it about optics? And if we can take them off for a photo, then we shouldn't be wearing them. Mm. And so fast forward a little bit, they have the driver's test. And I show up without a mask and they wouldn't let me test. And I said, what about social distancing? And they said, no, we're not going to let you. And so they kicked me out of that. I was not able to test. 5 days later, Maui County lifted the mask mandate and they still would not let me retest after that. So I was not able to promote or to take that promotional exam. They know that I'm not a mask wearer. They know that I push back. And they know that I'm not a no-nonsense mask wearer. Because if we go into a fire, I'll wear a mask. If we have a tuberculosis patient, I'll put a mask on the tuberculosis patient and I'll put one on myself and we'll go outside as we, assess that patient. Things that work and things that don't. And so I was just, they knew that I wasn't playing that game. In April of 2023, we get called in for a random drug test. And so we go in, it's just a common practice. In order for us to keep our CDL certificate to be able to drive the fire trucks, we have to get drug tested by a Department of Transportation facility. So we go into the testing facility and the lady there says, hey, you got to put a mask on. And mind you, the pandemic ended on February 10th of that year. President Biden and the National Institute of Health, and I think the CDC had declared the pandemic was over. There's no longer an emergency proclamation. And even Kaiser, which was one of the most staunch mask requirers here in the island, weren't requiring masks at the time. So everything had been dropped in Maui County. But the lady told me there that I had to wear a mask to take a drug test. And I said, why do I got to wear a mask to take a drug test? And she said, well, because of the pandemic. And I said, well, per the CDC, per the President of the United States, the pandemic ended actually a couple months ago. There is no mask requirement here in Maui County. And she said, well, you have to, or we're going to take it as failure to comply. So my officer, I let him know, my whole crew said they weren't going to wear masks either. But as soon as we went in there and she said they got to wear masks, they all put them on, except for me.
Also, he said, I'll pee right here. Like, give me the cup. I just don't see how this, like, I'll pee in front of all of you. It's not the peeing's not the thing. It's like the most sober he'd been in our whole entire adult life. It's just like me putting on a mask is not going to make a difference what comes out my urine. And, you
Sure.
know.
So I actually asked for reasonable accommodation. I asked her if she was a doctor and she said she's not. I said, well, I don't consent to wearing a medical device. I'm expressing my First Amendment constitutional right. I have this all on video. And I said, furthermore, this facility actually made a reasonable accommodation for me during the pandemic. They let me test without a mask on. And so I said, I know my rights. I don't need to wear a mask. It's unconstitutional. And so my officer called another facility that's a Department of Transportation facility, and they're like, and asked if I could come in and test. And they said, yeah, of course, automatic. You can come in right now and test. There's no mask mandate. We'd love to have your guy come in. So he kicked it up the chain of command to our battalion chief and then up to the operations chief and up to our chief. And he got a call back from our battalion chief and said, Fire One wants Joshua to come back to the station. So, okay, well, we're going to come back to the station. We're not going to be insubordinate. You know, there's not a mask wearing policy for drug testing. And there is a policy that I am supposed to listen to a chief when on duty, right? So we go back. And as soon as I get back to the station, we had my battalion chief, Fire 2 and Fire 3 were there. And they said, oh, you left the drug testing facility. That's failure to comply. We're terminating you. Go pack up your stuff.
It was dirty. It was really dirty.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was, in my opinion, it was a setup, like it was like they knew that I wasn't going to comply with that. And they used that opportunity to let go of me. And just to be clear, for people who don't know me, I love being a fireman. I was all into the job. I took training on the mainland. I taught for over a decade in Maui County. I was part of our honor guard. I was part of our critical incident stress management team. I was in our peer support team. I loved being a firefighter. In fact, our FGO cadre got instructor of the year for all of Maui County, for all departments. Like, I didn't get fired for being a bad fireman. I think I did a pretty good job at being a fireman. I think I got fired because I had different political views and I filed a lawsuit against the chief.
Wow. So you, at that point, like, you didn't know when you were going back to your station, you didn't know that you were going to be packing your bags and being let go. You just thought it was going to be like a conversation with the chief, like figure this out kind of thing, right?
Per our memorandum of agreement for our drug testing, it says in there specifically that the chief has the discretion to choose whatever testing facilities that we can go to. So he could have said I could have gone to that other facility that we go to all the time. He actually denied me the right and the privilege of doing that. So,
which makes sense, like knowing that he had a target on his back, right? It's still just dirty. Like even the, is it the union rep that called for all the state of Hawaii, called the chief and was like, this could have went 10 other ways.
Yeah, Bobby.
You could have just let him, like, why didn't you just let him test? My hands are tied. We were like, okay, you know what?
Yeah.
That happened.
Shauna, what was, because I don't know if that was immediate, what was your reaction when he actually told you?
He told me?
Yeah.
Well, he actually called me and it was like, hey, would you pray? This just happened. I'm headed back to the station and they're talking about my job being on the line. And I was like, yeah, I'll pray. And I actually think I'm going to cry thinking about it because it was actually just really hurtful. Like, we were so loved and supported by not just our fire department, but everywhere. And to go from like, Joshua being this like standout firefighter to them just like throwing him away like a piece of trash. And I think one of the hardest things was when he went to clean out his locker, they escorted him out like a criminal.
They had officers there to make sure I wasn't going to steal anything.
Really?
It's the best years of his life to this department, and I think so. It's been a process of just like processing the hurt and forgiveness, because I think like healing from grief or forgiveness, it's like you don't just go, okay, I forgive you, and then it's done. It's like, it's something you have to choose. You have to wake up and be like, you know what? We're not going to live in bitterness. When people treat you badly, when people have a vendetta and they live like that, like that's a reflection of them, not you. If you're walking in what's true to you, how God made you, like that's all that we can do, right? Is be the best version of us. And so holding on to bitterness, living in bitterness, that's not who we are. It's never who we've been. So I think it was just more like really hurtful. And to know that like it's actually only a handful of guys within the Maui fire department that had it out for him, that like most guys, like we would see guys out and we would be like, yeah, Joshua got fired. Like their jaws would drop. They were like, dude, you're the guy. Like if we showed up on a job and we knew you were there, we're like, everything's gonna be okay. Dukes is here. Like there's very few men who love the job as much as my husband and or knew the job as well as my husband and who loved it the way he did. So I think that 92% of the department was actually blown away. And they were like, what a disservice to our community, because he was one of the best. And then there's like the handful of them that just, for whatever reason, just got a bug out for him. And just, they needed him gone for them. But to me, it's like such a reflection of how they live. And so I think it's just been a process of forgiveness and processing the hurt. And then also being like, man, like we have a choice in how we move forward, right? We were kind of laughing, talking about, I joke that my next book is going to be The Shit Sandwich, a framework for telling your story. And I think like there's all this like beauty within the fire department. If we're talking about the shit sandwich, like we had this amazing rally of support and this beautiful career and just who Trucker was. And it was so, Trucker's life was so ingrained in Joshua's fire career and how we were supported from fire departments everywhere. And then, COVID hit and this happened and it was a whole different experience, right? But knowing that that's not the end of our story, that we actually think that happened for our greater good. Like, yes, it's a process of forgiving and pain, but it's also put us into this like sink or swim part of our life where we're like, I don't know if we would be as, we wouldn't be where we were at entrepreneurially if he was still in the fire department, because it's kind of like a safety crutch also, right?
So you have a lot of reasons to be bitter. And
yes,
the fact that you
the
fact that you choose not to says a lot about the two of you. And, I certainly admire your steadfastness and your resolve, Joshua, in this situation of standing up for your rights. And I'm not here to choose sides. So I'm not going, I don't know the full story. I hear what you're saying and I've heard other rumors, but like, I'm not here to choose sides. I respect what you did by standing up for what you believe is right. I think that there's always valor in that. So, getting back to grief and bitterness and whatnot, I assume this is where, Shauna, you must have came up with the idea for the Holistic Grief Academy, right? So tell us about that, how that came to be.
You know what? It kind of started before that when I wrote my book. And it was 5 years after Trucker passed. And I feel like whenever I talked about grief, people would be like, you need to talk about grief more. And I was like, no way. No way. My own grief is so heavy and I can't carry other people's grief. I'm not doing that. So there was a series of events. I always say that I feel like God's whisper in my heart when I'm running because I'm not distracted. And I was running one day. It was right after the 5-year anniversary of Trucker passing, which is usually a pretty heavy time for our family. And I went for a 6-mile run. And by the time I came back, I had this like download, like I was going to write this blog. And so I walked in my house and everyone was like, Mom, Mom, Mom. And I'm like, nope, I got to get this out. So 5 hours later, I published this blog post and I just got the most amazing feedback from it. And I was like, well, I actually felt pretty good. Felt pretty good that I could actually help people with where I'm at in my journey. And so a series of other events had happened. And I, again, heard, just a little whisper on my heart, like, you're not going to be known as a grief expert. You're going to be known as a hope giver. And I was like, oh, I like that. That's very good. That's very good. And so, from the time that I decided, like, okay, I'm going to write this book. And then when anyone asks me about grief, I can be like, I wrote a book. Here you go. Right. And so from the time I decided to write a book to when it was actually published was like 2 months. Like once I was all in, then it just like came out of me. And so I published a book. So that happened in 2021, 22. I don't even remember. And after then, I was like, okay, I did it. I wrote a book. But I think when you step out of your comfort zone and you start doing things that you never imagined possible or doing, it creates those neural pathways where you need more of something bigger. You want to be out of your comfort zone. Like, okay, well, what's next? Right? I wrote a book and I went through this season of being like, is this it, God? Like, was I just supposed to write a book? That's it? That's all you have for me? And feeling like I wasn't fully walking in my purpose. And so that's kind of how Holistic Grief Academy was born. was me just wrestling with this idea of um, not wanting to be about grief, but also wanting to walk in my purpose, and God gently showing me like, hey, they're intertwined. When you can use your pain and turn it into purpose to help others, that's when you're going to feel the most alive. And that has 100% been my experience. So I was wrestling with this idea of being about grief or helping others with grief because I thought other people's grief would feel as heavy as mine and I wouldn't be able to carry it. But the most beautiful thing that's happened is that when you allow yourself to be vulnerable, it allows other people to feel safe to be vulnerable too. And then you get this like deep connection, which I believe is at the core of every single one of us. And having Holistic Grief Academy has been probably one of the most beautiful things I've ever done in my life, besides being a mom. Yeah.
Is there one transformation that you can pinpoint that's been super powerful in someone else facing unimaginable loss?
Like a person's specific, but I can't talk specific, or like a
Something that you've
Great.
seen, through being able to guide them, relate to them, help them, that you've seen transformation, and maybe they've related that back to you, where they
Yeah.
didn't think that was possible.
I think two big things. I think community is huge because grief is really, really lonely, even when you're in a room of people. So I think having a community of other people who actually just truly know how hard it is to still show up in your life while you're grieving the loss of a child. And I think just having tools. Like really, when I stepped into grief, I wrote my book for me in early grief. I wrote like everything I do in Holistic Grief Academy would be as if I wish that I had a me in early grief.
Yeah.
So I think having tools, right? Having someone to hold your hand and having a community is huge. Huge.
Yeah.
I'm curious how, like, your kids were pretty young when Trucker passed, and even when Joshua got let go, right? I mean, how have you seen them deal with grief, and what kind of lessons have you learned from them?
I would say, one of the big things that I've seen with my children, and I think it's just probably going through this experience, but it gets acknowledged by so many different people that I have to bring it up, that they always tell me that my kids are so engaged and they're so good with younger kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that part of their experience of realizing or experiencing great loss and the loss of a loved one makes you appreciate the day and people more. And I think that that's been probably part of their experience. And that's one of the lessons that, I've learned too, but I'm a little bit older and more stubborn. And so to see them kind of walk in that has been inspiring for me too, just to be, more present and be aware of the people that, God puts in front of you. I think they've had, different seasons where it's affected them in different ways. I think because they were so young, they weren't pondering those big life questions like, where do we go when we die? What's the afterlife like? What is, how long are you supposed to live? Like, what are you supposed to do in your life? They were, that like any children, they have dreams and visions of what they want to do. But, you start to go into adulthood and you start to focus on those things and pursue those things. And I think that now as they've gotten a little bit older, I've seen this with my daughter, she's starting to ask those big life questions. I think grief is kind of resurfaced a little bit in moments. And, so you asked, what are the lessons that I've learned from them? Well, I think even with that grief, it comes in waves. It's kind of unexpected and it can hit you at all different times in your life. And I would say that's true because I've experienced that too. You feel like you're doing good and then something will hit you like a giant wave and knock you back down again. So those are two of the lessons that I've learned. And then as far as me losing my job, I've never been fired from any job I've ever had. And so the day that I came home, I gathered everybody around the dinner table and we sat down and I kind of explained the situation. And I was heartbroken. I cried, and I said, I lost my dream job. And the reason I know you said, you don't want to take sides. And so I want to be clear on that too. I don't want to take sides either, but I believe in freedom. I believe in freedom of choice. I believe people should have sovereignty. I believe in fighting for the underdog. And when I knew that 70 people's jobs were on the chopping block, I felt it was my obligation to fight. And then when I see some of these unconstitutional things coming down the line from our government, I look at the big picture too, is like, what kind of world am I going to leave for my children to inherit if I don't stand up and at least say my piece?
Mhm.
You know, if something does not align with our Constitution and I'm letting that slip away, then I need to fight for that, regardless of whether it causes me personal injury, because it's something, it's not just for me, it's for the next generation. And so I came home that day and I told my kids and my wife what happened. And my daughter, she just looked at me, she touched my cheek and she said, "Dad, I'm so proud of you.
No.
I love that.
I'm so proud of you for standing up for what you believe in, and so proud of you for standing up for fighting for us too," you know? And like, to me, that made that situation so much better, because as a leader, good leadership comes from being an example. It's not from barking orders or telling people what to do, but it's being exemplary in what you believe in principle, in value. And so I was just really grateful that my kids saw that. And hopefully, you know, when a trial or something comes their way that they know goes against their core values or what they believe in, that they're not going to sacrifice that for a paycheck, but they're going to stand up and do what's right.
Wow. That's good, man.
Those are some big lessons.
Big
And
lessons.
yeah, yeah. But you could already see the fruits of that, which is really cool, and probably when you needed it most. If others are currently going through loss, what's one thing that you wish that they would know?
Yeah. I think it's really important to cultivate healing habits, which we didn't do for a really long time. We numbed for way longer than we should have. And you know what? To be honest with you, like, I think you lose a child that's so painful, and most people can't fathom what it's like. Like, we could just become raging alcoholics, our marriage could fall apart, and nobody would bat an eye. They'd be like, oh, well, they lost a trucker, and then their family fell apart.
For sure.
But for us, it's like, we've always known that that's not what God, He has so much more for us. We have such purpose on our lives, and every single one of us do, not just Joshua and me. It's just, are you able to own it? And everybody has adversity. Like, I actually just made a post about this recently, but David Kessler says, you know, he's a big guy in the grief space, and he talks about when people have adversity or they lose someone, like, the big question that we often ask ourselves is, why me? But he's like, the question we should be asking is, why not me? Have you looked around? Every single person has been through something. Maybe it's not pediatric cancer or cancer loss, but man, there's a tragic things happening everywhere, and everybody has been through something. It's what you choose to do with it. You know, one of my favorite quotes is by another writer, Brianna Weist, and she says, your life won't be defined by what went your way. It will be defined by what you did when it didn't. And I'm like, that's so good. It's so good. It's like my life quote, because no matter what happens, you get to finish writing your story. You get to decide, do you become a raging alcoholic and numb the rest of your life because it's so painful? That's an option. But so is owning your healing. And so I think that that's huge. I think people need to know that they have some control over how they heal, and they can be an active participant in their grief. And how you do that is you cultivate daily healing habits. And that can look different for everybody. But the second thing I would say is just be gentle to yourself. Like, processing loss, processing losing a child, man, it's the hardest. It's hard work. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. The hardest thing I've ever done. Still doing. It's ongoing, you know? It's not like you hit one day and you're like, I'm good, we're done. We don't miss him anymore. No, we're going to miss him for the rest of our life.
Sure.
So yeah, I think that's me. What about you?
I would say, yeah, kind of reiterate the fact that you talked about giving yourself grace. We all do the best job that we can, you know, especially when you're in a tumultuous situation, and you will fall, you will make mistakes, but that's okay. And it's okay if you're broken and hurting and don't want to get out of bed that day. Like, that's part of it too. Have grace for yourself. There will be days when maybe you do drink too much. Like, I drank too much after my son died. I'm 100% sober now, which is awesome. It's probably about 90 something days, but I'm done drinking alcohol.
Yeah.
But there will be moments when it's just really, really hard, and that's part of the process. What I have found extremely valuable to me, and I wish I could tell myself, or someone who's grieving this, is that it doesn't make sense right now, but if you can find purpose in your pain in the future, it eases some of that sharpness and some of that hurt, because it makes it make sense. Because when you're able to give back to somebody else and share the lessons that you've learned, the mistakes that you've made, like I'm real honest about this, but I numbed way too much. Again, like I said, I drank too much. I was on social media scrolling. I kind of checked out for a little bit. And that was more detrimental to my family and my relationships. Like she even said, we got to the point where we were roommates, and I realized that those things that I was doing were not good. And if I can share that with somebody else, with another husband or another father, and keep him engaged in what's going on, then that is another way for me to honor my son and honor the tragedies and hardships that I've been through.
I love that.
And not take, and give them value.
Yeah. It's, I think it's really poignant that you didn't let that be the end of the story, right? You started to turn the page. And I know, like, even before all of this, you guys have always had a really tight knit family. And I love that. And I know you have done such a great job of investing in yourselves, in your family, in your mental well-being, in all the things that are, we have this podcast called Our Family Invests, right? And a lot of people think, well, it's about investing in real estate or whatever, because we've done a lot of that, but it's not. It's about investing in you, right? Investing in your health, investing in your family, all those kinds of things that people kind of take for granted that you guys have excelled at, right? And I love that. And I've loved seeing your family grow over the years. And I've always admired what you guys have had and continue to have. But I want to lighten it up a little bit here, because that was really deep and really dark and really
really good too, because it's true.
Yeah.
And life cycles are not one paved road. There are a lot of ups and downs. And so I think when you've spent so much time building that foundation, it helps you get through those times where you get off of the beaten path, So
makes it easier knowing that you've got a core nucleus that everybody is going to lift each other up, right? So, again, to lighten it up, if your family had a reality TV show, what would it be called?
Oh, I'm not good with names on the fly. I like to marinate and think about it.
Yeah.
Tell you what it would be about, but I think like you talked about all the tools that we've used to overcome grief. I think part of our success in that is just because it's part of our family ethos. Like we believe in fitness. We believe that food is medicine. So eating really clean, like we definitely have faith in God and a higher power, and we like to adventure, and we like to enjoy each other's time and company. So, I think that, and we go big in everything that we do. So, it would, I look at some of the YouTube channels and stuff that are out there, and I'm like, my boys have a more interesting life than even these people, and they have like a gajillion followers on YouTube, so it would just be about abundant living,
Okay, bringing back to, you mentioned adventure. Who's the bigger adventurer, and what is the craziest thing you've done together?
On a macro level, she's a bigger adventurer. I just don't like to travel. I don't like I like being at a place and enjoying the culture, but I hate traveling. I hate going through TSA. They always flag me. Like
I love it. I love it so much. I love people watching. I love being in airports. Like everybody's going somewhere.
Like, every time I go through, I think like I went through a period of time where I flew, and it was like 5 times. They're like, "Sir, we're gonna have to frisk you a little bit more," and I'm like, "Why me?" Like, do it. Anyways, but when it comes to a micro level, I think that the stuff that we do as far as food gathering, my family and I, we hunt, and well, my boys and I mainly, but we hunt and we dive for food. So we spearfish and swim with sharks and go after big giant boars in the woods. So I'm adventurous that way, but I don't like going far to do it.
And I am not. I'm like, sharks. I'm like, crying. Take mom back in.
That's a true story.
Sorry.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
My kids are all killing fish, and there's fish on the kui, and we're being circled by sharks, and Joshua has me like this, and I'm like swearing and crying, and he's like, come on back in.
Really fun adventure. Take me to the airport.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Love it.
Awesome.
What is one thing that you absolutely love about your partner?
Probably one of the things I love most about Shauna is she has one of the biggest hearts out of anybody I know. And she genuinely cares for people. And she just loves. She's really, what I mean by having a big heart is that she's really, really good at loving. And all that encompasses, whether it's, from like this morning, I went to the bathroom and I came back and there was a cup of hot coffee on my nightstand. And it's like little things that she does like that. And she's, I mean, you guys have met her. She's, have you ever read the book, The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so there's touch is one of them. And she's always like hugging. And I'm like, that's not me, but it's, she has trained me over the years that now I actually really like it, And so she's really good at loving people.
That's a
Thank
great
you.
characteristic.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things I love about Joshua, but if I had to pick like a top one in this moment, it would be the way that he fathers. He's such a good dad, and he didn't have a dad. His dad was really checked out and making really bad choices, and probably still is. We don't have a relationship with him. And he's so good with our kids. And in the way that, like, he takes time to explain things that I'm like, wow, like there's been so many times where like, it's just so beautiful to watch him with our kids. He's a really, really good dad. I love that very much about you.
Great job.
Another thing too, like top two, I always feel really safe around him. He makes me feel safe. He's like my safe space.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. She is. She's very safe around me.
That's great. I love it. What's next for you both, professionally, personally?
Personally, we're in a season of growth. And so I think we're in the next chapter, if that makes sense. I mean, looking past that, I'd say, reaching a level of financial freedom or success to be able to pursue more actively the things that God has purposed us for. But we're in that transition right now where we're growing, we're learning, we're reading books, we're listening to podcasts, we're studying. I'm taking a real estate course starting in February with your friend Brandon. I'm, I'm doing this 12-week operator program with Aerial Recovery right now. And then we go into phase 3 starting next month, where it's with this group called G-Force Mastermind. And it's a bunch of like really brilliant financial people. So learning about finances and investing. So that's kind of what's next is just a season of growth and really getting the skills and the language down to accomplish the goals that I'm going to do.
I would say that both personally and professionally. I think our goal would be to be full-time investors so that we can, not trade time for money, but be able to really pour into it, the things that we're passionate about. And another thing that's super on our radar is we want to host retreats. We want to help people heal because we know we've just learned a lot. We've learned a lot along the way. And so we're dreaming about, hosting retreats around the world, also in Hawaii, because that's a big destination for people. But yeah.
I want to, part of that vision is, we're on a podcast, so obviously we're talking, but most of us men, we don't always share feelings. We talk about, hey, did you catch the UFC this weekend? Or how about that football game? How are the Bears doing, Mike? Sorry, I know. But we're not always great at like sharing our feelings, where my wife can go have tea or coffee with her girlfriends. And it's like, they talk about everything at like a black coral deep level, So how, just like in the firehouse, we don't give that rookie the time of day until he proves that he can do the things that need to get done, right? You want to see, can he be the first guy to grab the sponge or be the first guy out there washing the fire truck before you give him the nozzle, right? You want to see that he's responsible, paying attention to detail. You want to see his character under action, right? Or through action, through adversity, in a sense. And so part of my vision for doing healing retreats with men is I want to come up with almost like a capability or survival camp where we go hunt. And I got my guided hunting license, so I'm doing guided hunts here in Hawaii. But I want to take guys and we go catch the food that we eat. And, you know, maybe we do some jujitsu or we do some workouts or some hikes over that 4-day retreat, some intense physical stuff where we have to do some team building and get through it together as a group. But then the magic happens when you get a campfire and you sit around and you eat this deer leg that you just got together, and people will, and you share it. Like she said, vulnerability is a superpower. You start by opening up and sharing a bit of your story, and then that's where the magic happens. And that's where healing can take place. Because
100%.
people, so that's kind of like on my radar of some of the stuff that I've got coming down the pipe in 2025.
I can't think of anyone that's better positioned to do that. You guys will be phenomenal at that. So sign us up for sure. So guys, if others want to get in touch with you, if our audience wants to find out more about you or get a copy of your book, where can they go to connect with you?
Yeah. Instagram's a good one. My website is shaunadukes.com. My Instagram is Mrs. Shauna Dukes. Yeah, I post a lot of grief content, and my website there's an opportunity to email me from there. And yeah, and you?
Perfect.
I have a couple social media accounts. I'm probably more active on Instagram. So the Joshua Dukes is my Instagram. And then I have another one called Cultivating Wild with Dukes. And that's kind of more of our farming, hunting, foraging stuff that we do. I haven't been super active on that one because I've just been working on getting that business kind of up and running, but I've got some stuff on there. And then just my email, mauidukes@gmail.com is another good way to get a hold of me if people aren't on social.
Perfect. And we'll link those in the show notes. So that'll be great. Thank you both so much for spending time with us, sharing with us, and, being open.
Yeah, you guys have just such an incredible story. I love the rising from the ashes that we've seen in you guys. And I love where you're headed. I think it's the right move at the right time. I think you've got the right experience. I mean, I think it's funny because, I say this a lot, but, life only makes sense looking back, right? Like you never would have saw any of this 15 years ago, any of it, right? But looking back, it's all going to make sense. And I can see the journey where it's headed right now for you guys. Looks like it is on point. So
I think
really appreciate you guys.
last time I talked with you, I joked around. I said how I was eventually going to write a book called How Losing My Dream Job in the Fire Department Was the Best Thing That Ever Happened to Me. And I think that's right with the timing, like the things that I'm involved with now, with the retreat work and getting my guided hunting license and being an entrepreneur and doing all these things. Losing my job was a catalyst for that. So,
yeah. Awesome. Guys, we're gonna wrap it up. I'm gonna end the recording here, but we really appreciate you. Thank you so much for coming on. You guys are amazing.
Love you.
thank you guys. Love you too.
Thanks for being part of the family today. If you want to see more of our journey through our personal life, businesses, and adventures, give us a follow on Instagram at Our Family Invests.
If you like this podcast, share this episode with a friend. And if you really want to support us, we would be so grateful if you would leave us a review on Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. Your review helps us to reach a bigger audience and bring on more amazing guests. Thank you so much. We really, truly appreciate you.